Hi, I'm Nancy. I'm the creative director of Aligned Design Co. When we work with clients on their brand identity and so on, we get to collaborate with some really interesting people, other people in the branding world with different areas of expertise. And what we wanted to do with this video series was to share some of the insights and the conversations that we might have behind the scenes. So enjoy. This conversation is with Libby Bartley. She's a content and launch strategy expert, and we've talked about your messaging, how to go about creating a content strategy for your brand, and when is the best time to do that when you're creating a new business. I hope you enjoy. So how much does the discovery work that, say, a brand studio might do at the start of their project with a client, how much does that then feed into the content strategy that you would then work on with them?
Yeah, I think honestly the discovery phase is the most integral element of, the messaging because that's your why, right? When you think about, again, that story that you're trying to tell, what makes you unique, why you're passionate about what you're doing, why consumers should care. I think that as you're really kind of exploring that and establishing that in the discovery phase, I think that that is really where your verbal identity, your messaging are born, and thus then your content strategy. I know I'm mentioning, the messaging phase quite a bit, and I really am of the mindset that messaging and content strategy go so hand in hand with one another. So yeah, to your point, I think that the discovery phase being, even as a writer or a strategist, to be included in as many conversations as it pertains to discovery is really valuable, because I think hearing, even I can't tell you how many times I've sat in on meetings with clients or teams and the topic of discussion might not necessarily be relevant, or they don't think they're talking about messaging, or they don't think they're talking about strategy, but being in those meetings and being able to kind of be a witness to different conversations, hearing how people talk about the brand who are creating it. I think all of those different things can be really, really impactful when you're trying to figure out what your messaging is going to look like. And then, like I said, how you're going to continue to bring that to life through different pieces of content that you'll put out over time.
Yeah, that makes loads of sense because it means that
Yeah.
you're picking up nuances that people probably don't even realize they're dropping, uh,
Yeah.
which I think that's why the discovery phase is so important for us,
So
our design work, because it's not just about um, what's on paper, but it's
right.
all really about getting to know the founder and what
Yeah.
they bring to it and what their energy is, and kind of
Yeah.
like you say their why, which is all, it all feeds in, doesn't it? And
Yeah.
yeah, and I guess as well it means that you're not repeating, like the client's not having to repeat themselves. If you're kind of involved in those early conversations, then they only need to go through that discovery uh,
Yeah.
at
Well,
the
and I think too, kind of going off of that, I think a lot of times, right, when you sit down and you say, okay, I'm going to focus on messaging, right? When you have that tunnel vision of, okay, this is what I'm focusing on, I think sometimes you kind of put on blinders in a sense, right? Because you're thinking about it, you're so close to it, you're thinking about it so intently. Whereas, like I said, in my experience, being a part of conversations where people aren't actually talking about the messaging or not consciously thinking about their tone of voice attributes,
yeah.
those then are the things that being able to sit in those meetings and say, hey, this is what I've observed, this is what I've heard from you. I think then just goes to make the work feel so much more authentic. Um, and I think too, having that authenticity is really important as you begin to develop your content strategy, because I really think I'm a strong believer that your why behind the brand really has to shine through far beyond your launch.
Mm,
Um, and I think consumers now are really savvy for being able to sense when the passion for a product or a brand is real, and when I think, like I said, I think consumers can pick up on that now in maybe a way that they haven't always.
yeah.
Um, so I think to be as immersed in the discovery phase as you can, like I said, is really, really powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. I think there's so many brands now that are telling such a compelling story.
Yeah.
It's changed so much in the last, I don't know, decade or more.
Yeah.
There used to be such boundaries around how people talked about their brand or what it was about. It was much more about the product. Whereas
Yeah.
if you're buying something, you're buying into a whole atmosphere, a world, a kind of beliefs. It's not, so many things, which is really exciting for brand builders, isn't it? Because we got
It
lots.
really is. Yeah. And I think, I think too, to your point, finding that point of difference is so important, right? I know you do a lot of work in beauty, as do I. And I think that that's a great example of an industry that has just blown up in recent years, for lack of a better phrase. And so to see so many different brands competing in the space, I think to be really clear on how you are approaching your discovery phase and what you're kind of leaving that phase with,
Yeah.
um again, like that, I think that that's what defines or differentiates rather a brand that's going to be around for years to come and is going to be, really forging a legacy, and brands that maybe are more of the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Because there's one thing to launch with impact, which is super important, isn't it? But then it's that to create an emotional connection and make sure people are going to stay with you. I guess
Yeah.
separate challenge, isn't it?
Yeah, we love that.
So to kind of demystify a little bit what you do, would you
Yeah.
through a little bit kind of what your typical process might be if you were working with a new client on a content strategy or a launch strategy?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I've kind of mentioned, I try to advocate for getting into meetings as soon as possible. Like I said, I think to just kind of be a fly on the wall and absorb as much information as possible is something that I think is always a great use of time, and something, like I said, that I really try to advocate for. I am also just I love a good brain dump. I think that a lot of creatives can relate to that. But I think being able to kind of take observations that you pick up on, whether it's in conversations or through other materials that have been kind of finalized or developed, prior to you joining a project, I think just really kind of being able to immerse yourself in that, and then kind of identify where there are opportunities to push the narrative, to even kind of think about, okay, we know that these are the core pillars of the brand, or we know that this is their key point of difference, to then kind of do a brain dump of what are all the different ways that we can create content around this.
Mhm.
What emotions do we think consumers are going to feel when we talk about these different topics? And how can we create in a way that, that really kind of hooks them and captivates them. Like I said, I think a brain dump is great to have a space where you can come up with ideas that feel great, and also ideas where you're like, I don't know about this, but we're gonna kind of keep it in the back pocket and revisit it later.
Yeah.
Um, so I would say that those are two elements of my process that are kind of non-negotiables. But yeah, I think kind of beyond that, just, I think it's really important for brands to be considerate of, you want to build a great content strategy, right? To your point, you want to make sure that you're thinking about emotions, thinking about how you're adding value to your audience. But I also think you have to be practical in the sense of, what resources do you have that you can leverage to actually create this content. I think I'm saying this more so as a consumer, but I feel like as a consumer, I've seen brands launch that are really exciting. They have a really flashy launch campaign. And then once they launch, there feels like there's a noticeable shift in terms of the way that they were creating when they first launched, and then the way that they're creating, maybe 3 months, 6 months, 12 months into, their kind of existence as a brand. So I think to be really mindful about, because it's like meeting a person, right? If I meet you for coffee and I, show myself kind of in one vein, and then, a couple of coffee dates later, you're like, oh, this doesn't feel like it's the same person.
Yeah.
They're like, oh, I don't know what this is about.
Yeah.
So I think, again, just being really mindful of your resources, giving thought to how, what it looks like to be continuously continuously executing ideas in this realm and through your content. Again, 3 months, 6 months, 12 months from now is really important.
I wanted to ask you as well, because obviously creative brains, I've been speaking to quite a few different creatives, obviously, as part of this series.
So cool. I love it.
It's so interesting to hear about
Yeah.
processes and how they think. Are you someone who likes to take yourself away and be by yourself and kind of mood board and, like you say, brain dump? And does that all happen solo, or are you someone who prefers to bounce ideas off other people?
I love that question. For me, I have found what works best is truly a balance between the two.
Mm.
Um, I find in a lot of the projects that I contribute to that typically I think what works is to have some time kind of at the beginning of a project to really kind of go inward and come up with ideas independently. But I also believe you have to have that element of collaboration, right? I mean, even in just the most basic sense of making sure that everyone on the team is aligned and making sure that the ideas that you have feel like they're resonating with the people who are also working to bring the same story, the same vision to life that you are. But I also I'm a huge believer too, that when you share ideas, that's such, such a big part of the joy that we get from
Oh yeah.
being in this world and getting to do the work is being able to discuss. And I mean, I feel like there's nothing that motivates me or fuels me more than being in a meeting and having people say, oh, I love this idea. Have you thought about strengthening it by doing XYZ? Or, you know, I think that when you can kind of almost take all those different creative influences and make something that kind of feels like a mosaic of a bunch of different ideas and sources of inspiration, obviously you want it to all tie back to the brand, but I think that there is power in, like I said, really just kind of letting yourself have a moment to let your creativity run wild with great ideas and maybe really not great ideas.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, because it's also funny too, right? Like, I don't know if you can relate to this, but I think in so many instances for me when I'm doing a brain dump or a mood board, like you said, I come up with ideas and maybe they don't feel like the right idea for this specific project or this specific campaign. But I think that to kind of have an arsenal of ideas is always really beneficial as a creative.
Mm.
Um, and like I said, I think that that can come about, in terms of what you consume independently, what you brainstorm independently, and also how you collaborate with your peers.
Yeah, it's super exciting, isn't it? Once you're happy with something that you've come up with, to then
Yeah,
with other people and see how they interpret it, and is it putting across what you think it puts across, and how they then take that idea and kind of
yeah,
and run with it. I think is one of the most exciting parts. I agree with you. Yeah.
agree. I also think too that that process is so important, right? Because it's also serves as a gut check. If you have, a team of 5 people and the ideas that I have feel like they're worlds away from the ideas that you have, and maybe worlds away, from the ideas that someone else has, I think that that is also an opportunity then to kind of take inventory of where you are at in your process, and I think can kind of illuminate, a need to either revisit something or to define something with more clarity. So I think that that's really important as well.
So if I can ask you one final thing, what
Yeah.
um if you were taking on a new client right from scratch, kind of, or if you were starting a new business right from scratch, is there one kind of piece of advice that you would always want people to know? Can be
Mm.
about anything.
I think my piece of advice would be you have to be clear on your why. I
Mm,
feel like, especially now with social media, I think there is a glamorization of entrepreneurship and building businesses. And I think, it's so easy to stumble across a brand that feels like it was born overnight. But as we know, being on the creative side of it, that's never ever the case.
so,
And so I think just being really anchored in why you want to create this product, why you want to bring this brand into the world. Like I said, I know I'm being a little bit repetitive, but I think that that why is so consistent, right? Because it's what will motivate you on the day where like everything is going wrong and you're just like, oh my gosh, is this even worth it? But then it's also the thing that is going to, just really tie all of these different pieces of your brand together. So I think you really have to have crystallized clarity around what that is,
Mm,
and, really be leading with that in all that you do as your journey as a creator, a founder, an entrepreneur, etc.
I love that. I completely agree. Yeah, it's definitely one of our big questions that we always ask at the start of
Yeah.
somebody, why are you doing it? And like you say, you, you can you can start a brand, but you need to know why you're doing it to make
Yeah.
get up in the morning and sort of grind away on those days.
Yeah.
So
Well, and even like you said, previously, there's so many brands out there nowadays that I think to offer an emotional motivation, right, for why you're creating the brand, why you care, why you think people should buy it, what problem you think it solves, how it adds value. Those are the things, like I said, that are going to propel you to be around for a long time and to reach a lot of people and to have an impact. Um, I like kind of like what we were saying. I think that the emotional connection that consumers have to brands, a lot of times there's an overlap between the passion that a founder has and thus then the passion that a consumer has as well.
and some brand worlds are just you just step right into them as soon as like I'm thinking of, do you know the brand No Polera?
I don't think I do. I'll have to look them up.
Beautiful. It's one of those ones where I just saw it and was instantly obsessed. Um,
Really?
yeah, it looks, the branding is really gorgeous, the packaging is really gorgeous, it's a beauty brand. Um,
Okay.
and it has kind of a real atmosphere about it.
Mhm.
Layers of, design like illustrations and shapes and things that really draw you in. So you don't
I love
feel like you're
that.
looking at another cookie cutter kind of bland
Yeah.
brand.
I in that spirit, have you heard of Merit? Merit?
Yeah.
Um, Merit is a brand like that for me, where I can't get enough of their content, their copy style. And I think that they are a really great example of a brand who, you don't have to spend a lot of time engaging with their content to know what they're about. I think they really reinforce their position of, makeup in 5 minutes and kind of this idea of minimalism and effortlessness. I think that they just do such a seamless job of bringing that theme and that why across. I think that I want to say they launched in 2020, so they've been around for a few years now. Um, but I think that that's a great example of a brand where their why is so clear and so obvious to the consumer. And like what did you say the brand was that you called
It's
No
called,
Clara?
yeah.
Oh, I love that. Okay, I need to look into that. I'd be really eager to see and
I
learn.
think the founder is from Mexico.
Okay.
There's the real feeling of that place, like cactus drawings of cactuses, and
Oh,
I
I
love
love
it
that.
with you. Yeah, it's.
How cool.
I think the designer is Abby Haddocken. Yeah, just to name check her so people don't think I'm pretending it's my design stuff.
Very cool. I'm going to do an immediate Google search after
Yeah,
this. I'm really eager to check them out.
yeah, amazing. Thank you so much for all that insight. That's been super helpful.